The afternoon sun cast sharp rays over the Hillsborough County Courthouse, its stone exterior imposing as Karoline Leavitt stepped inside. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and a white blouse, she walked with the effortless confidence that had defined her as Trump's youngest White House press secretary. Today, however, she wasn't here for politics. It was supposed to be a simple civil matter, a contractual dispute over a local property lease. Nothing major, nothing that should take more than an hour. Yet, as soon as she entered, she felt it. The atmosphere shifted. The clerk at the front desk barely looked at her but exchanged a glance with a nearby court officer, his lips tightening in something close to disapproval. A security guard watched her a beat too long, his expression unreadable. Karoline had dealt with this before. She knew the look. It was the look of people who already decided they didn't like her before she'd even spoken a word. She didn't let it shake her. Instead, she squared her shoulders, clutched her legal documents, and moved toward Courtroom 4A. Inside, the room buzzed with low conversation, a mix of attorneys, court clerks, and defendants waiting for their cases. The judge's bench sat empty. For now. Karoline took a seat in the second row, neatly stacking her paperwork. Then the door at the front of the room swung open. Judge Richard Calloway entered, his black robe flowing behind him as he took his seat. 64 years old, with deep-set eyes and silvered hair, he carried himself like a man who enjoyed power. And he wielded it freely. Calloway was well known in New Hampshire's progressive legal circles, harsh on conservatives, lenient on left-wing activists, and immune to scrutiny thanks to the right political connections. Karoline had read about him before. Now he was in front of her. His cold gaze swept the courtroom, pausing slightly when he spotted her. His jaw tensed, his fingers tapping once against his bench. That was all Karoline needed to see. She wasn't just another case on today's docket. This was about to get personal. Karoline barely had time to open her folder before Judge Calloway's voice cut through the courtroom. "Miss Leavitt, step forward." His tone wasn't just commanding, it was dismissive, like he'd already decided what kind of person she was. Karoline stood, moving toward the podium with a steady, composed gait. She'd faced hardened White House journalists, screaming leftist protesters, and high-pressure live interviews. This was no different. "State your case and let's keep it brief," Calloway added, flipping lazily through her file without even looking at her. Karoline didn't let his tone rattle her. "Your Honor, I'm here today regarding a lease contract dispute." "I know why you're here, Miss Leavitt," Calloway interrupted, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Let's just hope you're more prepared for this than some of your press conferences." A few chuckles rippled from the defense table. Karoline's grip on her file tightened. She'd dealt with condescension before, but hearing it from a judge inside a court of law was something else. "Your Honor, the contract in question—" "Spare me the textbook introduction, Miss Leavitt," Calloway cut in again, waving a hand. "Just get to the point." Another deliberate humiliation. Karoline inhaled slowly, adjusting her posture. "This lease agreement," she started again, forcing herself to keep her tone even. But before she could continue, Calloway slapped a palm against his bench, leaning forward. "Enough. I'll save you the trouble," he said. "The court won't be considering your contract as evidence today. It's inadmissible." A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even the court clerk hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Karoline blinked once, quickly. Then she met Calloway's stare. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this document was obtained legally. I have—" "I don't care," Calloway snapped, his voice sharp. "It's inadmissible." Silence. Karoline could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room on her. The bailiff shifted slightly near the judge's bench. The stenographer's lips pressed together in discomfort. Calloway sat back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk flickering across his face. He wasn't ruling by law, he was ruling by personal bias. Karoline took a measured breath, adjusting the cross necklace beneath her blazer. If he thought she'd back down, he was sorely mistaken. The courtroom air felt heavier now, thick with unspoken tension. Karoline stood at the podium, her grip firm on the legal documents Judge Calloway had just dismissed. But as unsettling as that was, she could tell he wasn't finished with her yet. She had seen this play before, a slow, calculated dismantling of someone's rights, step by step, under the guise of judicial authority. Judge Calloway leaned back, his cold gaze sweeping over her. Then his eyes narrowed slightly, settling not on her face but just below, on the small silver cross resting on the collar of her blazer. He smirked. "Miss Leavitt, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you here to conduct legal business, or are you here to make a statement?" Karoline blinked. "Excuse me, Your Honor." Calloway tilted his head, gesturing toward her cross. The courtroom is a neutral space. Religious symbols don't belong here. Remove it." For the first time, true silence fell over the courtroom. Even the stenographer's hands froze over the keys. Karoline felt her jaw tighten. This wasn't about the case anymore. This was personal. She kept her voice even. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I have the right to wear this. The First Amendment—" "Spare me the lecture, Miss Leavitt," Calloway interrupted, his voice dripping with mockery. "This isn't a White House briefing. I don't tolerate distractions in my courtroom." She could hear a sharp intake of breath from someone behind her. The bailiff shifted uneasily, his arms crossing over his chest. Even Mrs. Calloway, the court clerk, darted a nervous glance at the judge. But Calloway just leaned forward. "Take it off, now." Karoline didn't move. She had spent years preparing for moments like this. She had defended a president against media firestorms, navigated brutal political attacks, and debated some of the toughest legal minds in the country. She wasn't about to let a rogue judge bully her into submission. "No, Your Honor." Calloway's smirk deepened. There it was, the confrontation he wanted. A heavy silence settled over the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Calloway's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. "Then you leave me no choice." His gavel slammed against the bench, the crack of wood against wood echoing through the chamber. "For contempt of court and blatant defiance of a direct judicial order, I am issuing a fine of $1,000. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Even the defense attorney, who had been grinning just minutes earlier, glanced up in surprise. The stenographer hesitated, her fingers trembling over the keys before she forced herself to type. The bailiff shifted, as if unsure whether he should step in. Karoline stayed completely still. Her heart pounded, but her expression didn't change. She had prepared for bias. She had even prepared for disrespect. But this was an abuse of power. Calloway was still watching her, waiting for her reaction. He wasn't finished. "And if you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to hold you in custody until the fine is paid." It wasn't just a fine, it was a threat, a way to force her into submission. Karoline knew exactly what he was doing. She lifted her chin slightly. "Your Honor, you're violating my First Amendment rights." "And you're violating my patience, Miss Leavitt," Calloway shot back. "This is my courtroom, my rules." There it was. The mask had slipped. This wasn't about the law, it wasn't about courtroom decorum, it was about power. Karoline exhaled slowly, forcing her heartbeat to steady. She had two choices. She could pay the fine and walk away, let Calloway get away with it, let him intimidate someone else next time, or she could fight back. The moment stretched long. Karoline's fingers curled around the edge of the podium, steady, firm. Then she made her decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. For a moment, the courtroom stood still. The air felt thick, charged. Karoline could feel the weight of every single eye on her. She had a choice: bow to Calloway's abuse of power, or do what she had done for years, stand her ground and fight. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice clear, even unshaken. "Your Honor, I challenge your ruling." The room shifted. Even the bailiff stiffened. The court clerk glanced up, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Calloway's smirk faltered. Karoline didn't hesitate. "Your order to remove my cross violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, specifically the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause. You do not have the authority to prohibit religious expression in a public courtroom unless it is actively disrupting proceedings." Calloway leaned forward, gripping his gavel. "Miss Leavitt, furthermore, I'd like to cite Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969, in which the Supreme Court ruled that individuals do not forfeit their constitutional rights just because they enter a public institution." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The reporters in the back perked up. A few of them scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against notepads. "And let's not forget Church of Lukumi Babalu Aye v. City of Hialeah, 1993, Karoline continued, her voice measured, controlled, razor-sharp. "Where the Supreme Court ruled that the government cannot target specific religious practices with hostility. That is precisely what's happening here." Judge Calloway's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this. Not from a 27-year-old political figure, not from someone he assumed was just another media personality with no legal expertise. The courtroom was no longer his domain. The clerk's fingers finally began typing again, capturing every word. The bailiff exhaled slowly, as if realizing something was about to shift. And Calloway? For the first time that day, he didn't have a response. Judge Calloway's face burned red. His fingers tightened on the gavel. His breath came quicker. Karoline could see it, the desperation creeping in. He wasn't used to losing control. "That's enough, Miss Leavitt." His voice cracked just slightly, the first sign of weakness. Karoline didn't move. She could feel it, the shift in power. The jury exchanged glances. The clerk's typing sped up. The press reporters in the back were no longer scribbling. They were actively recording. Calloway saw it too. His panic turned to fury. "Since you refuse to respect this court, I am increasing your fine to $2,500. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. "This is outrageous," someone whispered. The bailiff stiffened, his hand twitching toward his belt. He knew what this meant. If Karoline didn't comply, he'd have to escort her out. Karoline remained steady. Then, with absolute deliberation, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She set it on the podium. The soft click of the recording app echoed through the now silent room. Calloway's eyes flickered, a brief, involuntary moment of realization. She was recording. And now, every word, every abuse of power, every unconstitutional move he made was evidence. A press reporter leaned forward, their camera now fully focused on her. Calloway's hand twitched toward his gavel, but he hesitated. For the first time that day, Karoline could see it. He was afraid. The moment Karoline placed her phone on the podium, the power dynamic shifted. Judge Calloway had gone too far, and now the world was about to see it. Somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a journalist discreetly sent out a text. The next thing Karoline knew, a press reporter's phone lit up. The video was out, and within minutes it spread like wildfire. Breaking! Judge Richard Calloway fines former Trump Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt $2,500 for wearing a cross in court. She fights back with the law. Unbelievable abuse of power. The reaction was instantaneous. The hashtags #LawOrderStandWithCaroline and judicial tyranny exploded across X. Within half an hour, the video had over 1.2 million views. Conservative leaders pounced. Senator Josh Hawley, unconstitutional, unethical, and un-American. Judge Calloway must be held accountable. We stand with Karoline. Religious freedom. Representative Matt Gaetz. This is why Americans don't trust the justice system. They target people of faith while protecting criminals. Karoline is exposing them. Charlie Kirk. Karoline Leavitt just pulled off a masterclass on how to fight back against judicial overreach. Judges like Calloway think they're untouchable until they're exposed. Judicial tyranny. Within an hour, Calloway's office was in full-blown crisis mode. His phones rang off the hook, his staff panicked, and by 8 p.m., the court's official email was flooded with thousands of messages demanding his immediate removal. Karoline, sitting in her home office, watched as her team worked overtime. Her phone buzzed non-stop, calls from attorneys, media strategists, legal experts. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. This was about exposing corruption, and she wasn't going to stop now. Karoline knew she had one shot at this. By 9 a.m. the next morning, her legal team was in full force. "We're filing an emergency injunction," said David Kent, a top constitutional lawyer who had defended multiple First Amendment cases. "This is bigger than you, Karoline. We need to take this to the state Supreme Court." She nodded. She had fought for President Trump in the media war, but now she was fighting for every American's right to religious freedom. By noon, the filing was official. Emergency injunction, Karoline Leavitt versus Judge Richard Calloway. The claim? Violation of First Amendment rights, abuse of judicial power, illegal suppression of religious expression. It took only 2 hours for the higher court to respond. Breaking. Judge Calloway has been ordered to provide a justification for his ruling against Karoline Leavitt. If he fails to do so, the fine will be overturned, and further investigations may proceed. The panic inside Calloway's chambers. Inside the Hillsborough County Courthouse, Judge Calloway sat frozen at his desk, his hands clenched, his phone buzzing with non-stop calls from reporters, legal analysts, and even his own judicial colleagues. He had never been challenged like this, and now he was being exposed. His past rulings, ones that had been ignored for years, were now under scrutiny. Reporters dug up his history, uncovering a pattern of dismissing religious cases, multiple complaints from conservative defendants, a suspicious trend of ruling in favor of progressive activists. Fox News aired a segment, "New Hampshire Judge Under Investigation. Did he weaponize his court against conservatives?" Tucker Carlson's team reached out. OAN lined up an interview. Even Newsmax scheduled a panel on judicial overreach in America. The conservative legal army assembles. By 5 p.m., some of the nation's top conservative legal minds publicly declared their support for Karoline. Harmeet Dillon called it a landmark case. Alan Dershowitz stated that Calloway was in violation of basic legal principles. Ted Cruz tweeted, "This case is about more than one judge. It's about stopping judicial activism in America." The courtroom battle was no longer just about Karoline's fine. It was about ending an entire system of political bias in the legal world. And now, a court date was set. Karoline wasn't just fighting her fine anymore. She was taking down a corrupt judge. The walls were closing in on Judge Richard Calloway. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the one holding the gavel. He was the one under scrutiny. The pressure was unrelenting. Inside his chambers, his phone rang nonstop. Calls from reporters, court officials, and even state legislators flooded his office. His staff looked shaken, whispering in the halls. His arrogance was gone, replaced with something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Breaking. The New Hampshire Judicial Review Board has launched an official investigation into Judge Calloway after complaints of systemic bias. Alarma. Within 48 hours, the floodgates burst open. Dozens of past defendants came forward, accusing Calloway of disproportionately punishing conservatives and religious individuals. Attorneys started sharing stories of their cases being randomly dismissed or unfairly sanctioned. A former court clerk leaked emails from Calloway's office, messages that hinted at politically motivated rulings. The Judicial Ethics Committee took notice. "This is beyond one case," stated an anonymous committee member in a leaked email. "This could expose an entire network of activist judges." Meanwhile, Karoline's appeal moved forward. She sat calmly in the courthouse as a panel of higher judges reviewed the case. Judge Margaret Hastings, a veteran on the New Hampshire Court of Appeals, narrowed her eyes as she read through Calloway's ruling. "So let me get this straight," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Judge Calloway fined a defendant for wearing a cross, citing court neutrality, but had no issue with other visible clothing statements?" A tense silence followed. Calloway, sitting at the defendant's table, shifted uncomfortably. He was sweating, his hands clasped tightly together. For years, he had weaponized his position. He had ruled without consequence. But now, he was the one being judged. Breaking. Governor Chris Sununu addresses the Karoline Leavitt case, calling for a statewide review of judicial conduct. Alarma. National news networks ran the story on loop. Tucker Carlson tore into Calloway's blatant disregard for constitutional freedoms. Sean Hannity called it one of the most outrageous abuses of power in modern courtroom history. Even mainstream networks couldn't ignore it. The public outrage was overwhelming. And now, there was only one possible outcome. Breaking. The New Hampshire Court of Appeals overturns Judge Calloway's ruling. Karoline won. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the lead judge read the verdict. This court finds that Judge Calloway's decision was unconstitutional, biased, and in clear violation of the First Amendment. The fine is hereby vacated. Calloway sat frozen, his jaw clenched, his face pale. The ruling wasn't just a legal victory, it was a humiliation. Breaking. The Judicial Ethics Committee places Judge Richard Calloway on immediate leave, pending a full review of his conduct. It was over. Court security escorted Calloway from the bench, his once commanding presence reduced to nothing. The media descended like a storm. "Judge Calloway, do you regret your ruling? Do you deny targeting conservatives in your courtroom? Are you stepping down?" He said nothing. Breaking. Lawmakers demand a full-scale investigation into biased judges across the state. A new movement was born, Senator Ted Cruz. Karoline Leavitt's victory wasn't just about one case, it was about sending a message to corrupt judges everywhere. We're watching. Charlie Kirk. This is the beginning of a larger fight. How many other judges like Calloway are out there? It's time to clean house. Governor Sununu. New Hampshire will not tolerate judicial activism. I am ordering an immediate audit of judicial rulings statewide. And then it was Karoline's turn to speak. Standing before a packed press conference, she stepped up to the podium. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. She adjusted the cross on her blazer. Then she spoke. "This wasn't just about me," she began. "This was about every American who has faced corruption in the legal system." The room fell silent. For too long, activist judges have used their power to target people based on their beliefs, their politics, and their faith. That ends today. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. If Judge Calloway thought he could silence me, he was wrong. And if any other judge thinks they can abuse their power without consequence. She let a small, confident smile cross her lips. They're next. The crowd erupted in applause. Breaking. Karoline, won trends #1 worldwide. Breaking. Judicial oversight committees across multiple states begin investigations into possible judicial misconduct. Breaking. A new era of legal accountability has begun. Karoline had done more than just win her case. She had sparked a movement. Karoline Leavitt's courtroom battle had ended, but the war for justice was just beginning. Breaking. Karoline Leavitt's case sparks national push for judicial oversight. Her victory wasn't just a personal one, it had exposed a systemic problem that Americans had been living with for decades. Judicial bias, corruption, activist judges wielding unchecked power. Now the tide was turning. By the end of the week, conservative lawmakers were already drafting new legislation aimed at reforming the judicial system. The Judicial Integrity Act of 2025 requires all courtrooms to be recorded and made available for public review. Mandates annual performance evaluations for judges. ensuring fairness and transparency. Creates a new oversight board with citizen participation to hold judges accountable. Senator Josh Hawley, Karoline Leavitt's case exposed what we all suspected. There are too many unchecked, power-hungry judges in this country. This legislation will restore integrity to the courts. The public support was overwhelming. Within days, petitions had hundreds of thousands of signatures demanding strict oversight of activist judges. And at the center of it all, Karoline. Her inbox overflowed with messages. Law schools invited her to speak. Conservative leaders wanted her at rallies. Legal experts sought her advice on reform. She was no longer just a political figure. She was the face of the fight for judicial accountability. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Judge Calloway's world was collapsing. The Judicial Ethics Committee had enough evidence to move forward with formal removal proceedings. Breaking. Under mounting pressure, Judge Calloway resigns before facing an official hearing. He tried to quietly step away, hoping to avoid public disgrace. But it was too late. Fox News headline, "Disgraced Judge Richard Calloway resigns after unconstitutional ruling against Karoline Leavitt." Tucker Carlson. Activist judges like Calloway are the reason Americans have lost faith in the system. His resignation isn't a loss. It's the beginning of a cleanup effort. Charlie Kirk. This wasn't just about Karoline. How many other Calloways are out there? It's time to expose all of them. Karoline had won her case, but she was about to win something much bigger. She wasn't just challenging one corrupt judge. She was leading a movement. 3 months later, the entire country felt different. What started as one courtroom battle had led to sweeping reforms. Breaking. Multiple states adopt new judicial transparency laws in response to Karoline Leavitt's case. New Hampshire, Texas, and Florida passed laws requiring public access to courtroom proceedings. Judicial oversight committees expanded, giving citizens more power to challenge corrupt judges. Congressional hearings were held to investigate broader patterns of bias in the courts. The activist judges who had operated in the shadows for years were now under the microscope. Meanwhile, Karoline's influence only grew. Breaking! Karoline Leavitt tapped to lead the National Commission on Judicial Fairness. She wasn't just a political figure anymore. She was a force. At her swearing-in ceremony, she stood before thousands, cameras flashing, reporters hanging onto every word. "We will never allow activist judges to strip Americans of their rights again," she declared. "The era of unchecked power is over." The crowd erupted in applause. Karoline had gone from defendant to leader, from a woman on trial to a woman setting the law. That night, as she sat in her home office, she glanced at a small framed receipt on her wall. Fine, $2,500. Violation, contempt of court. Defendant, Karoline Leavitt. It was the fine Calloway had issued in an attempt to silence her. Now, it was a trophy, a reminder that one person can make a difference. She took a deep breath, gazing at the document. Then, with a small smile, she whispered, "No one is above the law, not even corrupt judges." Karoline won trends #1 worldwide. The fight for judicial accountability had only just begun. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.